The Rebel Capitalist Show.
What did you learn from, we'll call it the cerveza sickness and everything that happened in the world 2020, 2021? So lockdowns, the mandates, all of the insanity. Because I was thinking about this the other day, and it's very true. If you would have told me at the end of 2019 that the world was going to look like it looks today, or 2020 for that matter, I would have told you that you're crazy. I would have said there's absolutely no way. There's zero chance of that. And then here we are in 2022, looking back, and now we talk about lockdowns as if it's like, oh yeah. Oh yeah, that country's locking down again. Okay, yeah, whatever. All right, kid, honey, you taking the kids to soccer practice tonight? Like, like that would have been completely mind-blowing in 2019. And it's not just that, but it's the whole disinformation and misinformation. I've tried to get my head around that, and all of this has come about, or really came to the forefront in 2020, dealing with the cerveza sickness. So I wanted to start there. What have you learned? Like the top 3 things that you've learned about the world, yourself, society, etc., from this whole thing that we've dealt with since 2020?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah.
So, so number one, my number one learning, I'm going to quote Lily Tomlin, the comedian, who said, "As cynical as I am, I find it hard to keep up." And I learned that I was already pretty cynical about my fellow humans, at least at the institutional level. Let me be clear. I love people. I don't like groups of people. I just have trouble with big groups. And to your hat's point, I hate how the Fed, I'm sure individually they'd all be reasonable people, but as an institution, they've been absolutely failing us. And so I wasn't prepared for the level of failures that we actually saw and what those revealed. So the CDC still failing to this day in a way that's killing people. And they're doing it because they have a revolving door and they have conflicts of interest and they're stuck in a bureaucratic nightmare. And individuals there, I'm sure, are fine, but as an organization, I was number one learning was when it really matters, you can't count on our organizations finally figuring out how to do the right thing.
Yeah.
So that was important to me because somehow I think I always had a little hope in the back of my mind, that when push comes to shove, maybe the Fed will do the right thing, or the CDC or the NIH or the US government. And the answer is no, they won't, right? They're going to double down and triple down on doing the wrong things because I don't know. We'd have to talk psychology. So that was one. 2 was the absolute ease with which whoever they are in this story, and we can have that conversation later, the ease with which they were able to manipulate people's opinions, beliefs, and emotions was astonishing to me.
Right.
I wouldn't have believed it. I mean, in 2019, I was pretty cynical, but I was not prepared, George, for the degree to which otherwise and often very otherwise intelligent people, highly educated and also maybe intelligent, because those two things don't necessarily go hand in hand, seem to have been some of the people who were the most taken over by whatever this mass psychosis, the programming, the next current thing. They were emotionally manipulated in ways that really was shocking to me, actually. So that was a big takeaway, is how easy it is to have people be manipulated.
Yeah, and I remember listening to Tom Woods. You know Tom Woods? Yeah. You know Tom, don't you, Chris?
Yeah.
I remember listening to him back in the 2020, and he was talking about when they first did the lockdowns in the United States, it was just 2 weeks to flatten the curve or whatever. And he thought, and he has admitted that he thought there was no way it could possibly go past 2 weeks because the American people just would not, they would protest. There would be civil disobedience. There would be social unrest. They just would not stand for this type of government intrusion in their personal lives. And then, 6 months later, he says, boy, I was sure wrong on that one.
Yeah, boy, I was wrong too. You know what they say? The hardest part of 2 weeks to flatten the curve is the first 685 days.
Yeah.
It gets easier after that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I cut you off there. I'm sorry. You're going to move on.
Yeah. Well, that was number two, is just, how easy people got manipulated and seem to love it. Actually, I know people who vigorously defend their right to be ignorant and remain ignorant because, as we talk about Cerveza and the Cerveza magic thing that you're given for it, right? The data is coming in, George, really bad right now, where there's no other way to parse it, but the people who got the magic stuff are doing worse now.
So
right?
Walk me through that, Chris, because I haven't kept my finger on the pulse of what's going on there.
Yeah, there's a tale of two countries. We could look at South Africa and Portugal. Portugal went all in. They actually have a magic juice sort of proportion that's, I think, at like 118% compliance. And how's that?
Oh, yeah.
Because that's 2 plus the third plus the fourth. So they're above, like they're completely covered. And then South Africa, they're like, not really. And you got like 13% or 15% compliance. So they're not into it. And they both have the same scary variant. It's the BA4/5. And when you look at them, South Africa's current deaths from that are running at about 1/6 of the recent peak when Omicron first came through. And Portugal's running almost at the same exact height it had before. They have a death rate now that's as high as it's ever been practically. And it's higher than at any other point earlier. So how this should be simple. If this stuff works magically, what's going on? And of course, this was all easily predicted because these variants and this magic juice, they have nothing to do with each other. So they keep wanting to do more of the same. And it's inarguably in the data causing more harm now at this point in time. So this should be something as a society, as a culture, not just US, but I mean, cultures that got wrapped around this. This should be easy. You sit down, you look at the data. It's like if you had an investment portfolio and you're just like hemorrhaging week after week after week, eventually you go, maybe I should reconsider my strategy here, right? But we can't seem to do that around this thing. It's very hard. I don't understand that as a scientist. It's very confusing.
I wonder why the politicians, I mean, what's their incentive there? What's their motivation? Because, I refuse to believe they're too stupid to understand this. I don't think they're smart people for the most part, but to understand this, you don't need a 150 IQ. So, then you can say, well, they're manipulated by the global elite. Maybe to a certain degree. I get that, but it's just, the vast majority of them, it just seems we've seen this consistent ignorance for just basic data and analyzing facts when it comes to policy. So it's like, what's driving this? Is it just strictly narrative where they have to be on board with this narrative because the left, let's say, has adopted this narrative, and therefore, if you want to cater to those constituents, then you can't change your view. You have to be on team lockdown, or you have to be on team special medicine, or whatever, magic juice, or whatever you want to call it. And you can't vary at all without risking your political career. Is that what it's about?
I think so. I mean, we could analyze this a bunch of different ways, and we have to wonder, are we just looking at the failure of education comprehensively over time, or is it, we've seen a lot of the rise now of people in, we'll call it the woke culture, as sort of a gross amalgamation for all the people out there who think this way, which is very simply, I would say it's feelings matter more than data. Like there's information, but feelings actually take primacy in this story. So, and that comes with a whole wrapper of things. So I think what we're seeing is we've hit a critical mass of people at leadership positions who fundamentally don't know how to think anymore, really, honestly, because that's really, it's that, can you let data drive your decisions, or are you going to let some social construct drive your decisions? And so it's really more about the ideology than it is about the facts of the matter. And so you asked me for three things, and my third thing is, I realized I was leaving some hope that humans were going to, like Hollywood style, rally to the story right at the end and figure stuff out. But I don't think so, and quick example by what I mean it should have been immediately obvious, like it was to me, and I'm sure it was to you and many of your listeners, that not having fertilizer at the beginning of the planting season is a bad thing, right? It's not really that hard to resolve. Yields and fertilizer go hand in hand. And, while I have a government that can rally like this to hand out $48 billion in military hardware to Ukraine instantly, they couldn't figure out how to rally anything except a few extra grants so farmers could go deeper in debt to maybe afford really ridiculously expensive fertilizer. Like, this should have been exactly flipped. Let's make Ukraine take out some loans to buy our hardware, and we'll give money to the farmers. It should have, but they didn't. And how could you not understand in this world, in this time, that having appropriate yields was going to be really important? And still to this day, people haven't wrapped their heads around it. And it's super simple to think through. But the feelings around supporting Ukraine took primacy over the feelings around supporting farmers, even though the facts of the matter, I think, would give you an exact opposite approach to that.
And also, is it because that's the only tool they have? And what I mean by that is they can print money, let's say, quote unquote. We'll use that term broadly, but they can't print fertilizer. And so is it because it's just easier to print money than it is to somehow do what is required to allow the producers to produce more fertilizer here, or for us to import it? What do you think about that theory?
Well, it really speaks to a kind of leadership that would be necessary. I think everything is so decentralized and, so centralized, but in a decentralized way. I don't think anybody actually feels like they have the authority at this point. Plus, we've packed people who just legit aren't up to the task. I mean, I don't know if you've seen her, but the energy secretary, I don't know that she even understands the first thing about, I don't know if she's even visited a drill pad in her life, or even knows what oil necessarily is made out of. We've got a transportation secretary who doesn't seem to understand transportation. So, I mean, there's just sort of this DC cronyism. So I think we have the wrong people in positions, but even with the right people, you would still have to be able to make the decision. Like, hey, you know what? I've made the decision. We need this over here, like a general or a field marshal might, in the heat of a battle, say, I have to make a quick decision without waiting for HQ to weigh in on this whole thing. I think we've lost the DNA for responding to rapidly emergent things. And so I think this is where we're finding out that we have a system that's tuned for the good times, but now we're coming into hard times. And I think we're just seeing how wanting that is, because it's unable to do anything other than exactly what it's been doing beforehand, even though now calls for all new reactions. Right.
Yeah, exactly. That's the key. And that's one of the problems that government and corporations, for that matter, getting so huge, is it's very difficult for them to navigate. That's one big edge those small businesses have, is they're far more agile and nimble in tough times.